plugin of the week is the Renaissance Compressor, and this is one that I think at first blush you think it's like, okay, well, really, what's so special about this? And I think what I really love about this compressor so much is that it's such a simple compressor, and it also has some unique characteristics or elements which make it really powerful, right? Just simple features. It's just like, okay, we got 5 sliders here and a couple of little independent selections that really help to shape the sound. And so when working with it, it's really simple. You got a threshold, nothing, revolutionary there. You got an attack time, which goes to 0.5 milliseconds. You got a release time, right? And which, goes all the way up to 5 seconds. You got a ratio control. Now, this is interesting. When you go downward, you can get up to 50 to 1, but you can also go to expansion, which is a 0.5 to 1. I'm going to show you a little example of what that's all about. And then you have makeup gain. So those are the basic characteristics of the basic setup of it. And what's really cool is that you can go to a manual setting or to an automatic release control. And the automatic release control, what it does is it gauges or modifies the release time setting that you have based off the program material. So if you have faster release characteristic, like more transient material kind of popping through more rapidly, the release time is sped up. And then when it's slower, it releases to a longer time. And therefore, it adapts to the program material. So sometimes what happens is if you have only a manual control on a particular sound, and that sound changes in terms of its performance going from active and transient to or more staccato to being more legato, more open sounding, then it can adapt to that and keep it musical sounding. It also has some very cool characteristics, which I think is one of the big things about this. And this shapes the release time characteristic to electro or opto. Opto characteristic, as I've said many times, means that the release time characteristic initially decays very quickly and slows to non-gain reduction. And the electro actually holds on or has a slow initial release and then a rapid release at the end. So that gives you a different characteristic to the shape of the release term. So this gives you a more sustained characteristic in terms of the compression. This gives you a more open sound, right, with a faster release, so more aggressive sounding. And then there's a smooth and warm, which is like adding like a warming sort of tube characteristic versus an open sound. So with all of these settings, you actually get quite a lot of control. So for example, if I just started with an initial kick drum, and let me just kind of give a little bit of makeup gain here, I can actually have like slow down my attack to allow that kick to pop through. And then kind of pick like get a release time. Let me increase the ratio. Make it pop a little bit more. Now, if I wanted to give it a little more body, I can put the electro in. Right? This makes it a little bit faster. Maybe hard to hear on this particular instrument. We could try it on the snare as well. And we could also add a warming character to it. And you can usually, I usually get some kind of setting here and then figure out what, works in terms of the release time. So I may actually go to more musical timings on this. But it's very cool. So let's just go to a quick snare sound here. So let me just kind of start with this as a starting place for the settings here. Again, I could either go to a fast time that really cuts down on the attack. And if I did that, I would actually really quicken the release. And this would give it more of a characteristic that would make it stand back in the speakers. And if I wanted it to be more aggressive, I would again slow down the attack. Right, so you could hear that brightness popping through. And set the release time to give the tonal sustain the right character. This being a little more open sounding with the opto, or a little bit more bodied. right? And this would give it like, so let's just see if I can bypass. Just to give it a little bit more pop. Now, one other feature that I want to show you here is the expansion characteristic. And this would work normally well in a room, but I'm just going to try it here with the overheads. And so the idea here is I can actually make the signal pump upward to the kick and the snare. And in this case, it probably would make sense for me to have a couple of sends. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to feed these to a couple of sends, just bus 17. I'm going to make my key input here bus 17. I'm going to take these guys and make them pre-fader just real quick so that they feed in. And now this will be the key signal, right? So you can see the kick and the snare now pumping this up, right? And then I can set the release characteristic. And what it's actually doing is it's pumping up, right? You could hear it pumping up. So what I would do is, since I have so much gain being added, what I can do here is I can actually set the actual gain to make down gain, if you will. And then normally I would figure out what the musical timing of this is. Maybe go with the more opto and smooth. Right, and there actually obviously it gets to be a little bit much. Maybe make it a little bit less aggressive than this. And this works really well with room sounds, but it's basically what you're doing is expanding the sound. So you're pumping it up, and then it drops back down at the tempo that you set it at. So you can get the release characteristic to really snap back and then shape how it goes back, which is kind of cool. So it's really an incredibly flexible compressor, and sounds very good. Like, it gives you all the characteristic elements without actually being a vintage component, but it gives you the characteristics of vintage components, which is sort of the idea of the Renaissance collection of plugins. They're not meant to emulate vintage components, but they're meant to actually emulate the characteristics of vintage components. And it's a really good all-around compressor that you could use that's very functional, that serves a lot of purposes and basically sounds musical, and gives you some controls over the characteristic of the sound, which is kind of cool. So anyway, that's a good one. That's the Renaissance compressor by Waves, and that's our plugin of the week.